The scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on the bustling streets of downtown, where an upscale Italian restaurant stood as a beacon of fine dining. Among the crowd gathering outside its elegant entrance was Priya, a young woman in her early 30s, gently rubbing her 8-month pregnant belly as beads of sweat trickled down her face. The day had started like any other. Priya had wanted to surprise her husband, Raj, by having lunch at what everyone claimed was the city's finest Italian restaurant. What she didn't know was that her husband had secretly purchased this very establishment 3 months ago, keeping it under wraps as he worked to transform it into something spectacular. As Priya approached the hostess stand, she could feel the heat intensifying. The morning had been relatively cool, but now, at 1 p.m., the temperature had soared to uncomfortable levels. She watched as groups of people were quickly ushered inside the air-conditioned sanctuary of the restaurant, while she remained standing, her feet beginning to swell inside her comfortable sandals. "Excuse me," Priya called out politely to the hostess, a woman in her mid-20s with an air of superiority about her. "I was wondering if I could possibly get a table? I'm expecting, and the heat is quite intense out here." The hostess, Diane, barely glanced up from her tablet. "I'm sorry, but as you can see, we're very busy. Do you have a reservation?" Her tone carried a hint of dismissiveness that made Priya's heart sink. "No, I don't," Priya admitted, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "But I was hoping, given my condition." She gestured to her prominent baby bump. Diane's perfectly manicured fingers tapped against the tablet screen. "Unfortunately, we're fully booked for lunch. You'll have to wait like everyone else or make a reservation for another day." She turned her attention to a well-dressed couple behind Priya, completely ignoring her discomfort. The minutes ticked by slowly as Priya stood in the heat, watching person after person being led inside. She noticed that some who arrived after her were being seated, including people who, like her, didn't have reservations. Each time she tried to catch Diane's eye, the hostess would purposefully look away or become suddenly engrossed in conversation with other staff members. Inside the restaurant, Raj was in his private office, reviewing the latest financial reports. He had purchased the restaurant after years of success in the tech industry, fulfilling his secret dream of owning a high-end dining establishment. He had kept it from Priya, planning to surprise her on their upcoming anniversary with the news that they were now restaurant owners. The security cameras fed directly to a small monitor on his desk, allowing him to observe the daily operations. As he glanced at the screen, something caught his eye. There, standing in the heat outside, was a familiar figure. His heart nearly stopped when he recognized Priya, his pregnant wife, being made to wait in the sweltering summer heat. Raj watched in growing disbelief as the hostess repeatedly ignored his wife's presence. He had specifically instructed all staff to be accommodating to pregnant women, elderly people, and anyone who might need special assistance. In fact, it was written clearly in the restaurant's policy manual. His blood began to boil as he observed Priya's obvious discomfort. She had found a small spot of shade against the building's wall, but it offered little relief from the oppressive heat. He could see her fanning herself with a magazine from her purse, her face flushed from the temperature. The past 3 months flashed through Raj's mind, all the late nights he'd spent at the office, the secretive phone calls, and the mysterious meetings. He had hated keeping secrets from Priya, but he had wanted the restaurant reveal to be perfect. Now, watching his wife suffer needlessly at the hands of his own employee, he felt a mix of anger and guilt wash over him. As he continued to watch, he saw Priya attempt one more time to speak with Diane. The hostess's dismissive wave of the hand was the final straw. Raj stood up from his desk, straightening his tie. It was time to make his presence known, but first, he needed to understand exactly how deep this problem ran. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Linda, please come to my office immediately." Linda, his restaurant manager, had been with the establishment for years, even before he purchased it. He trusted her judgment and needed her insight before taking action. As he waited for Linda to arrive, Raj kept his eyes fixed on the security monitor. Priya had now been standing outside for nearly 20 minutes in the heat. He watched as she pulled out her phone, presumably to call him. His own phone buzzed in his pocket, but he let it go to voicemail. He needed just a few more minutes to put his plan into action. What had started as a simple surprise lunch visit was about to transform into something much more significant. Raj had always believed that true character was revealed in how people treated others when they thought no one was watching. Today, he was about to learn some valuable lessons about his staff, and they were about to learn some important lessons about assumptions and human dignity. Linda knocked on Raj's office door and entered, her expression curious. A veteran of the restaurant industry with 20 years of experience, she had a keen sense for spotting trouble before it erupted. The look on Raj's face told her something significant was brewing. "Linda, how long has Diane been working as our hostess?" Raj asked, his voice carefully controlled as he gestured toward the security monitor. Linda stepped closer to look at the screen, her eyes widening slightly as she noticed Priya standing outside. "Diane's been here for about 8 months, sir. She came highly recommended from another upscale restaurant across town." She paused, studying the scene playing out on the monitor. "Is that your wife outside?" Raj nodded grimly. "Yes, and she's been waiting there for nearly 25 minutes now. I've been watching Diane seat other walk-ins while completely ignoring my pregnant wife in this heat." He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Tell me, what's our policy regarding pregnant women and special accommodations?" Linda's face darkened as she watched Diane's behavior on the screen. "We have a strict policy of prioritizing pregnant women, elderly customers, and anyone with special needs. It's one of the first things we cover in staff training." She shook her head in disappointment. "This isn't the first complaint about Diane's attitude, sir. We've received several comments about her selective treatment of guests." As they spoke, Priya had finally found a small bench near the entrance. Her face was flushed, and she was clearly uncomfortable. Several other customers in line had noticed her condition and were throwing disapproving looks at the hostess stand. An elderly couple approached Priya, offering her their water bottle and trying to create more shade for her with their umbrella. The simple act of kindness from complete strangers made Raj's heart both swell with gratitude and ache with frustration. These people had no obligation to help his wife, yet they showed more compassion than his own employee. "Linda, I want you to go out there and observe Diane's behavior firsthand," Raj instructed. "Don't intervene yet, I need to understand if this is an isolated incident or a pattern. Stay for about 5 minutes and then come back to report." As Linda left his office, Raj's phone buzzed again. Another call from Priya. His hands itched to answer it, to tell her to come inside, to explain everything. But he knew that addressing this situation properly could lead to important changes in how the restaurant was run. He needed to see it through. Outside, the temperature had climbed even higher. The elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, as they had introduced themselves to Priya, remained by her side, sharing their umbrella and engaging her in conversation to distract her from the discomfort. "My daughter just had her baby last month," Mrs. Chen was saying, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. "I can't believe they're making you wait out here like this. Would you like us to speak to the manager?" Priya smiled gratefully but shook her head. "Thank you, but I don't want to cause any trouble. I'm actually waiting for my husband to call me back. He usually has good suggestions for these situations." She tried calling Raj again, growing increasingly worried when he didn't answer. Meanwhile, Linda had positioned herself near the entrance, pretending to check the outdoor menu display. She watched as Diane greeted a group of young professionals who had just arrived, immediately offering them a table despite their lack of reservation. When another pregnant woman approached shortly after, she was also told to wait, though several tables were clearly available. Inside his office, Raj was formulating a plan. This situation had revealed several issues that needed addressing: the selective treatment of customers, the disregard for restaurant policies, and most importantly, the lack of basic human compassion. As a new restaurant owner, he realized this was his first real test. How he handled this would set the tone for his leadership. Linda returned to his office, her expression grave. "Sir, I've seen enough." In just 5 minutes, I watched Diane turn away another pregnant woman while seating 3 groups who arrived after her. "She's clearly violating our policies and showing discriminatory behavior." Raj stood up, straightening his suit jacket. "Thank you, Linda. Now, here's what we're going to do." Outside, the situation was reaching a breaking point. Several customers who had witnessed Diane's behavior began to openly complain. A young man in line spoke up, "This is ridiculous. These pregnant women have been waiting in the heat while you're seating everyone else." Diane's response was cool and dismissive. "If they wanted guaranteed seating, they should have made reservations like everyone else. But you just seated those people who didn't have reservations," another customer pointed out, pointing to the young professionals who had just been escorted inside. The mounting tension was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. The crowd parted as Raj emerged from the restaurant, his presence commanding attention. Behind him, Linda stood ready to assist. The moment of truth had arrived, and the restaurant was about to witness something none of them would soon forget. Priya's eyes widened in surprise as she recognized her husband. "Raj? What are you doing here?" she called out, confusion evident in her voice. The pieces hadn't quite come together in her mind yet, but she could tell from his expression that something significant was about to unfold. The afternoon heat seemed to pause for a moment as all eyes turned to watch the scene developing before them. What happened next would not only change the restaurant's future but would also teach everyone present a valuable lesson about compassion, assumptions, and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. Raj walked purposefully through the crowd, his eyes moving between his wife and the hostess stand. The afternoon sun caught his wedding ring as he extended his hand to help Priya up from the bench. The concerned faces of Mr. and Mrs. Chen watched intently as he gently kissed his wife's forehead. "I'm so sorry you've been waiting out here in this heat," he said softly, loud enough only for Priya to hear. "Give me just a few minutes to handle this situation." The confusion in Priya's eyes mixed with growing understanding as she watched her husband turn toward the hostess stand. Diane was already straightening her posture, recognizing Raj from the employee photographs in the break room. Her confident demeanor faltered slightly as she realized the pregnant woman she'd been dismissing was connected to someone important. Still, she maintained her professional smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Kumar, I didn't expect to see you here today," Diane said, her voice carrying a nervous edge. "Is there something I can help you with?" Raj's response was measured and clear. "Yes, there is. Could you please explain your current system for seating guests without reservations?" The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing the tension in the air. Diane's fingers nervously tapped her tablet. "Of course, sir. We prioritize our reserved guests first, and then seat walk-ins as space becomes available." She glanced around, suddenly aware of the many eyes watching this exchange. "I see," Raj replied calmly. "And could you explain why you've seated several parties who arrived after my wife, while she waited outside in this heat for nearly 40 minutes? The color drained from Diane's face as the implications of his words sank in. Her eyes darted between Raj and Priya, who still stood surrounded by the kind elderly couple who had helped her. "Your wife?" Diane stammered, her composure cracking. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." Raj held up his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Whether or not she was my wife shouldn't matter. Our policy clearly states that we prioritize pregnant women, elderly guests, and those needing special assistance. I've watched you ignore not only my wife but another pregnant woman as well." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, still holding her umbrella over Priya. "We've been watching too. This young lady has been so patient while others who came after her were seated immediately." Linda, who had been quietly observing, moved closer to Raj's side. "Sir, would you like me to check our security footage from the past few weeks? We should review if this is a pattern of behavior." Diane's professional facade completely crumbled. "Please, Mr. Kumar, I can explain. We've been so busy, and I was trying to maximize our seating efficiency. I thought. You thought some customers were more valuable than others," Raj finished for her. "That's not what this restaurant stands for. That's not what I stand for." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "I apologize to everyone who has witnessed or experienced poor treatment here today. This restaurant was built on the principle that every guest deserves respect and dignity." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. The young man who had spoken up earlier nodded in appreciation. Several people had their phones out, recording the scene, impressed by how the owner was handling the situation. Priya stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Raj, when did you?" She gestured at the restaurant, realization dawning in her eyes. He smiled softly at his wife. "I bought it 3 months ago. I was planning to surprise you on our anniversary next week." He turned back to Diane, his expression becoming serious again. "But that's not what's important right now." Linda produced the restaurant's policy manual from behind the hostess stand. Section 1.3 clearly outlines our seating priorities and accommodation policies, she stated, opening the manual to the relevant page. Raj nodded. "Diane, I believe in second chances, but I also believe in accountability. I'd like you to take the rest of the day off. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We'll discuss this incident in detail and decide the best path forward." Diane nodded mutely, gathering her personal belongings with trembling hands. As she stepped away from the hostess stand, Linda smoothly took her place, beginning to organize the waiting guests with efficient professionalism. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Raj called out to the elderly couple. "Thank you for showing kindness to my wife when my own staff did not. Please, be our guests for lunch today. In fact," he raised his voice to address the crowd, "I'd like to offer complimentary appetizers to everyone who has been waiting patiently during this situation." The tension in the air dissolved into appreciative smiles and thank yous. Linda began efficiently organizing the seating, properly prioritizing those who needed special accommodation. The other pregnant woman who had been waiting was immediately shown to a comfortable table near the air conditioning vent. Priya watched all of this with a mixture of pride and amazement. "So this is why you've been working late these past few months," she said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "I thought you were having an affair with your laptop." Raj laughed, pulling her close. "The only affair I'm having is with this restaurant, and now you know why. I wanted to create something special, a place where everyone feels valued and welcomed." He placed his hand on her belly, feeling their baby kick. "I wanted to build something for our future." As they walked into the restaurant together, followed by the Chens and the other waiting guests, the afternoon sun caught the elegant sign above the door. The events of the day had transformed what could have been a public relations disaster into a powerful statement about values and leadership. Inside, the cool air wrapped around them like a blessing, and the subtle aroma of Italian herbs and freshly baked bread filled the air. The other diners, who had witnessed everything through the large windows, offered supportive smiles and nods as Raj led his wife to the best table in the house. The story of what happened that afternoon would soon spread across social media, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of focusing on the negative behavior of one employee, people would share the story of how a restaurant owner turned a moment of discrimination into a lesson about dignity, respect, and the importance of treating every person with kindness, regardless of who they might turn out to be. The next morning arrived with a gentle warmth that bore little resemblance to yesterday's scorching heat. Raj sat in his office, reviewing the security footage from the past month while waiting for Diane to arrive for their meeting. Each clip he watched revealed a pattern that both saddened and strengthened his resolve for change. Priya had insisted on coming in with him, despite his concerns about her rest. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she had reminded him with a smile. Now she sat in the corner of his office, sipping ginger tea and occasionally offering insights as they watched the footage together. "Look at this one," she pointed out, gesturing to a scene from last week. She turned away an elderly man with a cane while seating a group of well-dressed businesspeople who arrived after him. A knock on the door interrupted their review. Linda entered first, followed by Diane, who looked like she hadn't slept much. Her usual pristine appearance was slightly disheveled, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had spent the night in deep reflection. "Good morning," Raj greeted them, gesturing to the chairs he had arranged in front of his desk. "Please, sit down." Diane's eyes widened slightly when she saw Priya, but she managed a polite nod before taking her seat. The room fell into a thoughtful silence as Raj organized the papers in front of him. "Before we begin," Diane spoke up unexpectedly, her voice trembling slightly, "I'd like to say something, if I may." When Raj nodded, she turned to face Priya. "Ma'am, I am truly sorry for how I treated you yesterday. And not just because you're the owner's wife, but because no one should be treated that way. I didn't sleep at all last night, thinking about how my actions could have affected you and your baby." Priya leaned forward, her expression softening. "Thank you for that apology. But I'm not the only one who deserves to hear it." Diane nodded, wiping a tear from her corner of her eye. "I know. I've been thinking about all the people I've turned away, all the times I made judgments based on appearances. I used to work at an exclusive restaurant where we were encouraged to profile customers. I brought those terrible habits here, and I was wrong." Raj shared a glance with Linda before speaking. "Diane, we've reviewed footage from the past month. This wasn't an isolated incident, was it?" "No, sir," Diane admitted, her shoulders slumping. "I thought I was doing my job well by ensuring the right kind of customers got the best treatment. My previous employer used to reward us for that. It's not an excuse, just an explanation of how I was trained." Linda pulled out a notebook. "We've documented 17 incidents in the past month where you violated our seating policies. Each one represents someone who came to our restaurant hoping for a pleasant experience and left feeling diminished." The weight of the numbers seemed to hit Diane hard. She closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. "I understand if you need to terminate my employment. I would deserve it." Raj leaned back in his chair, sharing another look with Priya. "Actually, we have a different proposal. You clearly understand what you did wrong, and you seem genuinely remorseful. Instead of firing you, we'd like to offer you a chance to be part of the solution." Everyone in the room looked at him with surprise, including Linda. Raj continued, "We're going to implement a new training program focused on inclusive customer service and human dignity. Given your experience with different approaches, you could provide valuable insight into what needs to change." "I don't understand," Diane said, confusion clear in her voice. Priya spoke up from her corner. "Sometimes the people who have made mistakes are the best teachers for others. You understand both sides now, the wrong way and the right way. That knowledge is valuable." Linda nodded, catching on to the idea. "You could help us identify subtle forms of discrimination that others might miss. Help train our staff to recognize and correct these behaviors before they become habits." However, Raj added firmly, this would require a different role. "You wouldn't be at the hostess stand for now. We'd start you as a training assistant, working with Linda to develop our new customer service program. Your pay would remain the same, but you'd need to prove yourself in this new capacity." Diane sat straighter in her chair, hope replacing the defeat in her eyes. "You'd give me that chance? After what I did? Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow from their mistakes," Priya said softly. The question is, are you willing to put in the work? Yes, Diane replied without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. I want to make this right. The next hour was spent outlining the new training program. Linda took detailed notes as they all contributed ideas. Diane, drawing from her past experiences, pointed out subtle forms of discrimination they might have missed. Priya suggested adding a section about accommodating pregnant women and others with special needs. As the meeting wound down, a delivery person knocked on the office door, bringing in a large arrangement of flowers. For Mrs. Kumar, he announced, setting them on a side table. Raj looked confused, he hadn't ordered any flowers. Priya read the card and smiled. They're from Mr. and Mrs. Chen. Listen to this, thank you for showing us that one person's kindness can inspire changes that benefit many. We look forward to many more lovely meals at your restaurant. The simple gesture brought tears to Diane's eyes. That's the couple who helped you yesterday, isn't it? While I was. She trailed off, unable to finish. Yes, Priya confirmed. And they're right. Sometimes it takes one incident to spark important changes. Yesterday wasn't just about me being treated poorly, it was about recognizing that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect. As they left the office, the morning sun streamed through the restaurant's windows, casting warm patterns on the polished floors. The staff was beginning to arrive for the lunch service, and Diane would soon start her new role, helping to reshape the restaurant's culture from the inside out. Raj watched as Linda took Diane to meet with the morning staff, already beginning to implement their new training ideas. He felt Priya's hand slip into his and turned to see her smiling up at him. You're going to be an amazing father, she said softly. The way you handled this situation, firm but compassionate, focused on growth rather than punishment, that's exactly what our child needs. Raj pulled her close, feeling their baby kick between them. We're building something special here, he said, looking around at the restaurant that had become so much more than just a business venture. Not just a place to eat, but a place where values matter, where every person counts. 1 month had passed since the incident that transformed the restaurant's culture. The changes were evident in every corner of the establishment, from the newly installed comfortable waiting area with priority seating for those needing special accommodation, to the warm smiles that greeted every guest regardless of their appearance or attire. Diane had thrown herself into her new role with unexpected passion. Today, she stood in the restaurant's private dining room, conducting a training session with a group of new hires. The room was filled with eager faces as she shared her personal journey. I used to think good customer service meant catering to the wealthy and well-dressed, she explained, her voice carrying the wisdom of hard-learned lessons. But true hospitality means treating everyone with equal respect and dignity. Let me tell you about the day I learned this lesson the hard way. As she recounted the story of Priya's wait in the heat, one of the new servers raised her hand. But wasn't it embarrassing to stay on after that? I mean, everyone knew what happened. Diane smiled thoughtfully. Actually, it was more embarrassing to realize how many people I had hurt before that day. Staying and working to fix things? That's not embarrassing, that's growth. Meanwhile, in the main dining room, Linda was showing Priya the latest customer feedback cards. The restaurant had implemented a new system where guests could share their experiences, and the results were remarkable. Look at this one, Linda said, holding up a card. A grandmother wrote that she brought her granddaughter here for lunch. The little girl uses a wheelchair, and she was amazed when our staff immediately reconfigured a table to accommodate her comfortably, without making a fuss or drawing attention to it. Priya, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, smiled as she read through more cards. Her presence in the restaurant had become a regular sight, and she had developed a keen eye for ensuring their new policies were being properly implemented. Here's another touching one, she said, picking up a pink card. A young couple celebrating their anniversary mentioned how they felt welcomed despite their casual attire. They wrote that they'd been turned away from other upscale restaurants before, but here they were treated like valued guests. The kitchen door swung open, and Raj emerged carrying a small plate. Trying out a new appetizer, he explained, setting it down in front of Priya. The chef's been experimenting with pregnancy-friendly options for our menu. This was another change that had emerged from their experience, a special menu section designed for pregnant women, considering common aversions and cravings. It had proved surprisingly popular, not just with expectant mothers but with anyone looking for lighter, more carefully seasoned options. As they sampled the dish, Mr. and Mrs. Chen walked in for their now regular weekly lunch. They had become beloved regulars, and their original act of kindness had inspired a new tradition at the restaurant. The kindness table is occupied again, Linda reported happily, gesturing to a corner table where an elderly man was enjoying his meal. The kindness table was a new initiative. Each day, the restaurant offered a complimentary meal to someone in need, no questions asked. The idea had come from remembering how the Chens had shared their water and umbrella with Priya. "You know," Mrs. Chen said as she stopped by their table, "we've told this story to all our friends. About how a difficult moment turned into something beautiful." She patted Priya's hand affectionately. "And look how you're glowing now, dear. The baby must be due soon." "2 more weeks," Priya replied, rubbing her belly. "Though this little one seems quite comfortable where they are." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. A pregnant woman had arrived, looking flushed and uncomfortable, remarkably similar to how Priya had appeared that fateful day. The difference in response, however, was immediate and heartwarming. 2 staff members immediately approached her with a warm welcome. One brought a glass of water while the other prepared a comfortable seat. Within minutes, she was settled at a table in a quiet, cool corner of the restaurant. Diane, who had just finished her training session, watched the scene unfold with tears in her eyes. "That could have been me a month ago," she said quietly to Linda. "Watching someone suffer while I judged their worthiness to be here." "But it's not you anymore," Linda reminded her gently. "You've helped create something special here." The restaurant's transformation had not gone unnoticed by the community. Local news had picked up the story, focusing not on the initial incident but on the positive changes that had emerged from it. Other restaurants had begun reaching out, asking about their training program and inclusive policies. Raj had started offering monthly workshops for other restaurant owners and managers, sharing their experiences and the lessons they'd learned. "It's not just about rules and policies," he would explain. "It's about creating a culture where every person feels valued." As the lunch rush began to pick up, Priya watched the smooth operation of the restaurant with pride. Every guest was greeted with genuine warmth, seating was handled efficiently and fairly, and the atmosphere was one of inclusive elegance. A young couple walked in, clearly dressed for a special occasion though their clothes were simple. A month ago, they might have been made to feel out of place. Today, they were welcomed like old friends, their special occasion celebrated rather than judged. "You know what makes me happiest?" Priya said to Raj as they watched the restaurant operate. "It's not just that we fixed a problem. It's that we created a place where kindness is the standard, not the exception." Raj squeezed her hand, remembering the day he'd watched her waiting in the heat. "Sometimes the best things come from our most challenging moments," he reflected. Who would have thought that one difficult afternoon would lead to all this? The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the dining room. At one table, a business executive shared lunch with his driver. At another, a group of nurses still in scrubs enjoyed their break. Near the window, a young artist sketched in a notebook while enjoying a solo meal. Every table told a story of inclusion, every interaction reflected their new values, and every smile confirmed that they had created something truly special, a place where good food was just the beginning of what they served. A local food critic sat in the corner of the restaurant, quietly observing the lunchtime service. She had come unannounced, drawn by the growing buzz about this establishment's unique approach to hospitality. What she witnessed that afternoon would inspire one of the most touching reviews of her career. The critic watched as Diane, now fully embracing her role as training coordinator, guided a new hostess through a challenging situation. A large group had arrived without a reservation, including someone using a wheelchair and an elderly woman with a walker. "Remember," Diane coached softly, "we don't just accommodate physical needs, we anticipate them. What do you think we should consider here?" The young hostess, thoughtful for a moment, replied, "We should arrange a table that's easily accessible, away from the main traffic flow, with enough space for the wheelchair. And maybe offer to help with the walker?" Diane beamed with pride. "Exactly. And how do we make these arrangements without making our guests feel different or singled out?" As the new hostess handled the situation with grace and sensitivity, the food critic made notes on her tablet. She had come expecting to write about the food, which was indeed excellent, but found herself increasingly captivated by the restaurant's atmosphere of genuine care. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Raj was meeting with his chef about their latest menu innovation. They had decided to expand their accessibility initiative beyond physical accommodations to include dietary ones. "So these new menu cards," the chef explained, spreading them out on the prep table, "use different symbols to clearly mark common allergens, but also indicate which dishes can be easily modified for various dietary needs." Raj nodded approvingly. "And the Braille menus?" "Arriving next week," Linda interjected, entering the kitchen with a tablet in hand. "Along with the large print versions. But that's not why I'm here." She turned to Raj with an excited expression. "You need to see this email." The message was from a prestigious restaurant industry association. They wanted to feature the restaurant's transformation story in their annual conference, highlighting how one incident had sparked a revolution in hospitality standards. "They want all of us to speak," Linda explained. "You, Priya, me, and especially Diane. They're calling it The Power of Second Chances, Transforming Restaurant Culture." Raj leaned against the kitchen counter, taking in the news. "What does Diane think about this?" "She's nervous but willing. She says if sharing her story can help other restaurants avoid making the same mistakes, it's worth facing her discomfort." The kitchen door swung open as Priya waddled in, one hand on her very pregnant belly. "What's all the excitement about?" she asked, accepting a chair that the chef quickly pulled out for her. As Linda shared the news, they were interrupted by a commotion from the dining room. A customer was getting frustrated with one of the new servers, his voice rising loud enough to be heard in the kitchen. "This is what happens when you let just anybody into a fine dining establishment," the man was saying, his face red with anger. "The service here has gone downhill since you started catering to everyone off the street." The new server, a young man named Dev who had come through their inclusive hiring program, stood frozen, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. The customer's words had struck a particularly painful chord. Dev had once been homeless himself before getting back on his feet. Before anyone from management could intervene, something remarkable happened. The other diners began to speak up. "Sir," came Mrs. Chen's firm voice from her regular table, "I've been coming here for months, and the service has only gotten better." Another customer joined in. "If you want exclusivity, you're in the wrong place. This restaurant's strength is that it welcomes everyone." The angry customer looked around, suddenly aware that he was the one out of place in this environment. His face reddened further, but this time with embarrassment rather than anger. Diane, who had witnessed everything, approached calmly. "Sir, would you allow me to share a story with you? About how I learned the true meaning of hospitality?" As she quietly spoke with the customer, Dev was surprised to find several other diners stopping by his station to offer kind words and encouragement. The food critic observed it all, her article practically writing itself. Later that evening, after the restaurant had closed, the staff gathered for their daily debrief. It had become a tradition to share stories of the day's successes and challenges, ensuring that every experience became a learning opportunity. Dev spoke up first. "I want to thank everyone for their support earlier. In my previous jobs, I would have been told to just accept that kind of treatment. That's not who we are," Raj responded firmly. "Every person who works here, every person who dines here, deserves to be treated with respect." Priya, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly gasped and grabbed her belly. All eyes turned to her as she looked up with a mix of surprise and joy. "I think," she said with a gentle laugh, "our little one has decided it's time to make an appearance." The staff burst into excited chatter. Linda was already calling for Raja's car to be brought around, while Diane rushed to get Priya's hospital bag from the office. The angry customer from earlier was forgotten as the restaurant family came together to support their own. As Raj helped Priya toward the door, she paused and looked back at the restaurant that had become so much more than just a business. "It's perfect, you know," she said softly. "Our baby choosing to arrive here, where everything changed. Where we learned that the best things in life happen when you open your heart to everyone." The food critic, who had lingered to observe the evening service, watched the scene unfold. She typed a final note into her tablet. "In a world that often seems divided by prejudice and presumption, this restaurant stands as a beacon of hope." Here, a moment of discrimination was transformed into an ongoing legacy of inclusion. The food is exceptional, yes, but the true 5-star rating goes to the spirit of humanity that flavors every aspect of the experience. The morning sun peeked through the hospital room window, casting a gentle glow on Priya as she cradled her newborn daughter. Raj sat beside them, unable to take his eyes off his two precious girls. Outside in the waiting room, something unprecedented was happening. The entire restaurant staff had taken turns coming by, creating an impromptu celebration that had the hospital staff smiling at their enthusiasm. "She's beautiful," Mrs. Chen whispered, having arrived with her husband bearing traditional sweets and a hand-knitted blanket. "What's her name?" Priya and Raj exchanged a loving glance before Priya answered, "We're calling her Kira, it means, beam of light. Because she represents all the light and positive change that has come into our lives." The Chens beamed with pride, having become like surrogate grandparents over the past months. Their simple act of kindness on that hot afternoon had blossomed into a deep friendship that transcended cultural boundaries. Back at the restaurant, Linda and Diane were implementing a special celebration menu. The news of Kira's birth had spread among their regular customers, and many had called to make reservations specifically to celebrate the occasion. "Look at this," Linda said, showing Diane her tablet. The food critic's review had just been published, and it was unlike anything they had ever seen. Instead of focusing solely on the cuisine, the article told the story of their transformation, describing how a moment of discrimination had given birth to a movement of inclusion. In an industry often criticized for its exclusivity, Diane read aloud, "This establishment has proven that true luxury lies not in keeping people out, but in welcoming everyone in. The real 5-star experience here isn't just about the food, it's about the dignity with which every person is treated." The article had already gone viral, leading to a flood of reservations and inquiries from other restaurants wanting to learn from their example. But what touched the staff most were the personal stories that began pouring in through their website. A young woman wrote about bringing her grandmother, who had dementia, to dinner. She described how the staff had shown infinite patience as her grandmother repeated questions and occasionally became confused. "For the first time in years," she wrote, "we were able to enjoy a family dinner without anxiety." Another message came from a former fine dining chef who had become disabled after an accident. He shared how he had stopped going to upscale restaurants, tired of the awkward handling of his wheelchair, until he heard about their establishment. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost, the joy of dining out without feeling like an inconvenience." A week after Kira's birth, Raj stood in his office, making final preparations for the restaurant industry conference where they would share their story. The presentation had evolved into something larger, a blueprint for transforming restaurant culture across the country. Diane knocked on his door, carrying a thick folder. "These are all the training materials we've developed," she explained, setting them on his desk. "But I think we should start with this." She pulled out a photograph taken the day of the incident, showing Priya waiting in the heat while the Chens shared their umbrella. "You want to begin with your biggest mistake?" Raj asked, surprised. Diane nodded firmly. "Yes. Because it shows that change is possible. That one moment of failure can become a catalyst for something beautiful." As they discussed the presentation, Linda burst in with exciting news. "The city council just called. They want to use our training program as a model for all local businesses, not just restaurants. They're calling it the Dignity for All initiative." The impact of their story had begun reaching far beyond the restaurant industry. Schools were requesting workshops on inclusive practices. Business consultants were studying their model of transformation. Even their competitors were reaching out, wanting to learn rather than compete. That evening, Priya brought baby Kira to the restaurant for the first time. The staff had decorated the entrance with flowers and a small banner reading, "Welcome to our newest family member." As they walked through the dining room, customers offered quiet congratulations and warm smiles. They found Mr. and Mrs. Chen at their usual table, which had been specially decorated for the occasion. Mrs. Chen immediately reached for the baby, cooing softly in Mandarin as she cradled her. "You know," Mr. Chen said thoughtfully, "that day when we shared our umbrella, we had no idea we were becoming part of such an important story. We just saw someone who needed help." "That's exactly what makes it so special," Raj replied. "Real change doesn't always start with grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with a simple act of kindness." Dev, who had grown into one of their most confident servers, approached with a special dessert the chef had created in honor of Kira's first visit. "We're calling it Sweet Beginnings," he explained proudly. "Because every day is a chance to start something new." As the evening progressed, Priya observed the restaurant with new eyes. At one table, a young man in worn clothes enjoyed the same impeccable service as the business executives next to him. A group of teenagers with pink and blue hair were treated with the same respect as the elderly couple across the room. A family with a child with special needs dined comfortably, without a single awkward glance from staff or customers. "You know what I love most?" Priya said to Raj as they watched their restaurant family in action. "Every person who walks through those doors becomes part of our story. And every day, that story gets better." Linda approached with a guest book they had started keeping, filled with messages from customers. "Listen to this one," she said, opening to a recent entry. "Today, I brought my mother here for her birthday. She uses a walker and is often self-conscious about dining out. Within minutes, your staff had made her feel like royalty. Thank you for showing that fine dining can be both elegant and accessible." As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows, baby Kira slept peacefully in her carrier, surrounded by the warmth of an extended family that had been forged through one challenging moment and countless acts of kindness that followed. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat, it was a testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, and a living example of how treating every person with dignity could create ripples of positive change throughout an entire community. 1 year had passed since the hot afternoon that changed everything. The restaurant was hosting a special anniversary celebration, but it wasn't just about marking time, it was about celebrating transformation. The dining room buzzed with energy as guests from throughout the year gathered to share their stories. Little Kira, now walking with wobbly steps, toddled between tables, receiving warm smiles from the guests who had watched her grow through regular visits to the restaurant. She made her way to the Chen's table, where Mrs. Chen scooped her up with practiced ease. "Hard to believe it all started with a pregnant lady in the heat and a shared umbrella," Mr. Chen mused, bouncing Kira on his knee. The elderly couple had become such a part of the restaurant family that they now had their own private celebration dates marked on the restaurant calendar, their anniversary, birthdays, and the day they first shared their umbrella with Priya. Diane stood near the entrance, greeting guests with genuine warmth. She had just returned from a national restaurant conference where she'd given a keynote speech about their journey. Her presentation, titled From Exclusion to Embrace, A Story of Restaurant Revolution, had received a standing ovation. The most powerful moment, she told Raj and Priya, was when other hosts and hostesses came up afterward to confess their own biases. They wanted to know how to start their own transformation. Can you imagine? The mistake that I was most ashamed of has become a tool for helping others change. The celebration was also marking another milestone, the launch of their training academy. What had started as an internal program had grown into a full-fledged school for hospitality workers, teaching not just service techniques but the fundamental principles of human dignity and inclusion. Linda, now the academy's director, was showing a group of visitors around the newly renovated training space adjacent to the restaurant. We believe that true hospitality begins with understanding, she explained. Every person who walks through a restaurant's doors carries their own story. Our job is not to judge those stories but to add a positive chapter to them. The training program had caught the attention of universities, and they were now partnering with several hospitality management schools. Students would come for internships, learning that excellence in service went far beyond proper plate placement and wine knowledge. Dev, who had faced discrimination that day a year ago, was now one of their lead trainers. His personal experience had become a powerful teaching tool. When I tell my story, he shared with a group of students, it's not about shame or blame. It's about showing that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their background or appearance. As evening approached, Raj called for everyone's attention. The restaurant had been transformed for the celebration, with tables arranged to create an intimate atmosphere despite the large gathering. Regular customers mingled with staff members, industry professionals, and community leaders who had supported their journey. A year ago, Raj began, holding Kira in his arms, this restaurant was just a business I bought to surprise my wife. Today, it's become something none of us could have imagined. But the real celebration isn't about our success, it's about the community we've built together. Priya stepped forward, her eyes scanning the familiar faces. Look around this room, she continued. We have CEOs sitting next to construction workers. We have families celebrating special occasions next to solo diners enjoying quiet meals. We have people of all backgrounds, abilities, and walks of life. This is what success looks like, not in our profit margins, but in our ability to create a space where everyone belongs. The food critic who had written that first viral review stood up to share her perspective. When I first came here, I expected to write about food. Instead, I found myself writing about humanity. This restaurant has proven that luxury isn't about exclusivity, it's about making everyone feel extraordinary. As if to demonstrate this point, the chef had prepared a spectacular anniversary menu that accommodated every dietary need and preference. The dishes told their own story of inclusion, combining traditional fine dining with innovative adaptations that made them accessible to all. Mrs. Chen raised her glass for a toast. To the power of small kindnesses, she said, her voice carrying across the room. You never know when sharing an umbrella might help change the world. The evening continued with more stories being shared. A young woman spoke about how the restaurant had hired her brother, who had Down syndrome, giving him his first job opportunity. A retired teacher described how she had finally found a place where her wheelchair was never seen as an inconvenience. A recovering addict shared how the restaurant's second chance hiring policy had helped him rebuild his life. As the celebration wound down, Kira had fallen asleep in her father's arms, peaceful amid the gentle buzz of conversation. Raj and Priya stood at the entrance, saying goodbye to their guests, no longer customers, but members of an extended family that had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. Linda approached with one last surprise, a bound book containing letters and photos from the past year. "We've been collecting these since day one," she explained. "Every story of transformation, every moment of connection, every small victory." The final page held a photo taken just moments after Priya had been left waiting in the heat. Below it was a recent picture of the entire restaurant family, staff, regular customers, and supporters all together. The contrast between the two images told the story of their journey more powerfully than words ever could. "You know," Diane said, looking at the photos, "some people might say we're just a restaurant. That all this talk about dignity and inclusion is too much for a place that just serves food. But they're missing the point. Every interaction is an opportunity to show someone their worth." As the last guests departed, Raj, Priya, and baby Kira stood in the quiet dining room. The space held so many stories now, of challenges overcome, of barriers broken, of lives touched in ways both big and small. What started with a moment of discomfort has become a movement of compassion, Priya reflected, watching Kira sleep peacefully. And the best part? This is just the beginning. The restaurant lights dimmed, but its impact continued to shine bright, a beacon of hope showing that change is possible, that every person deserves dignity, and that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with the simplest acts of kindness.